Okay, here is our next CLPL continued learning program. What I wanted to highlight was low achievement in boys. Primarily, I wanted to highlight this as it was a study that we're currently doing within secondary education and being part of. And it's a study that's been going on since the early 1990s. At the moment, it's taken a big highlight within schools and education, and it got me thinking of how we're impacting and affecting the learning of all of our players, and then specifically boys, as at the moment within our setup at the club within January 2021, we only have boys involved in the coaching setup at the moment who have joined our football club within its first 8 months of operation. So, if there is a low achievement in boys, how does this coincide from education to their performance on the football pitch? Now, there hasn't been a direct study as such where there's low attainment within secondary and whether that has affected performance or low attainment within sport and how the difference has been bridged and whether there is a gap to bridge. So, for me, if there is a gap, how can we bridge this gap and how can we impact all of our players, specifically the boys? Within this CLP, I'll delve into some stats and figures, and I'll try to create some context as well as providing some strategies, ideas, and ways that we can approach all of our players. This will interlink and create further foundations for our other CLPs, such as communication, coaching intervention and strategies, practice design, types of practices, and then a number of other CLPs that will further progress us as coaches here at the club. Now, this is a contemporary issue considering the low attainment within education of boys and their performance. I wanted to highlight and ask the key questions, providing an objective of identifying low achievement in boys in education, making a connection to their participation in community sport, identifying strategies and creating awareness to support their learning within their sport performance. The key question being, how does this relate to football coaching and their performance on the pitch? With us as coaches considering, how does this impact us, my coaching design and delivery? As we move on, I just wanted to create some context. The first context being there is a figure here presented by Welsh Government on a National Teacher Assessment Data Collection of 2020-2021. As you can see here, the percentage of boys and girls achieving their expected level 4 or above in maths at Key Stage 2 between 1999 and 2020, you can quite clearly see between the two contrasts that boys are underperforming in consideration of girls. Now, there is one girl that we have recruited within our time frame who has joined one of our setups in the team. As much as we're looking at the fact around low achievement in boys, we should also be considering how can we impact girls and utilise their approach to learning. And as we hopefully grow and get more girls as part of our club membership, there's going to be two perspectives, two ways we can look at this. One, the underachievement in boys, and two, the achievement in girls, and how we capture their learning to support their growth as a footballer, as a player, as an individual during their time at our football club. However, although we talk about maths and we're looking at Key Stage 2 here, this is a prime example of how girls can outperform boys and how they're achieving more when we're approaching things. Now, if we're looking at maths, though, I wanted to highlight this. As we provide stats and figures and data to players, and we collect a lot of data to support their learning, we provide mentoring, we want to give them objectives, we want to create individual learning plans. If we're giving boys their percentage of attendance, and we're calculating identified areas to improve their learning through mentoring, then we need to understand, well, do the numbers work for them? How can they better understand their numbers? How can we chunk their learning so they can further understand their objectives and push their achievements, set themselves challenges, achieve the higher expectations? And what player profiles do they have, and how can we impact these players? So are they players who want absolutely everything? They want the stats and figures. They want every training session to be their highest performance and they want to achieve the best. Are they wanting to be the next professional? Or are they in it for fun? Do they just want to turn up, have a bit of fun, maybe get some learning on the way, and then if football doesn't work out for them, they've had a fun time, or football's just a kickabout? Or are they just, I don't mind football, I turn up for a bit of fun, sometimes I'm all in, but other than that, I don't mind, football's there for me. So for me, there's three player characteristics that we have, three player profiles, and we have to identify their characteristics and how we can further support their player profiles in our approach. So there's a holistic review, and I want to collate this for our coaching curriculum and look at our CLP design and how we look at players holistically and our interventions towards them. Now here is another data collection from the Welsh Government. What it shows here in Table 4, it shows the high percentage of girls and boys achieving higher levels than expected. Mostly between the years 2009 and 2019, there were a higher percentage of girls and boys achieving level 8 in maths in Key Stage 3, while a higher percentage of girls also achieved level 6 and 7 in each year over this period. So it's quite clear that girls continue to outperform boys, and it creates some kind of context that boys are underachievers. It's not creating a comparison or narrative that girls are performing better than boys in every context, or that girls are better than boys. It's to create that context that boys are underachievers. Now, if they're taking away this within the classroom and in education, how do the strategies support us and support them in their learning on the football pitch? How can we understand players? So if they're sitting in the classroom and they're not taking it in, why? So if they're stood on the football pitch and they're listening to a 15-minute lecture or 15-minute worth of instructions, or we're constantly stopping and starting practice, then are they taking it in? Are they understanding? Are they focused? How much have they actually taken away from it? For us as coaches to stand back and observe other coaches and look and support each other, and how much detail and content is being delivered at certain periods of time, whether it's lots of instructions all at once or we layer our instructions, what type, how we communicate, can we chunk those instructions, what are our expectations, how do we adapt? There's so many elements that I want us to consider and how we approach all of these players, especially if they have low focus and especially if they're not understanding the full instruction. For me, I always ask the question to myself, if I give this player this much information, can they relay it all back to me, and do they understand? If they can't, and the answer is no to both of those, then have I been successful in ensuring what I want this player to achieve? And if I haven't, then I'm not going to achieve much with this player, and I'm going to have struggled during this time. Here is just a full overview of a percentage of foundation pupils achieving outcomes in 1 to 6 in mathematical development. This also interlinks with literacy. So with literacy and numeracy, we're providing stats and figures and how we communicate with these players and how they communicate their feelings, especially boys, as boys don't communicate their feelings back. Then these are two core elements that boys underachieving that we must be aware of as football coaches whilst being on that football pitch with them, of how we can impact them and look at their and review the way we approach every player as best as possible. Now here are some of the facts. I've lifted this from Sport Wales participation report of the 17-18 year of the last one conducted. It showed that 48% of pupils in years 3 to 11 participate in extracurricular or community sport 3 times or more per week. This is unchanged since 2015. 47% of pupils within years 3 to 6 participate in community sport 3 or more times a week. For me, this is a key fact, a key stat that we must take away as we look at our player recruitment, and this must also be a consideration of us as a club and us as coaches when looking at these players. How can we improve that 47 benchmark which has been attained at the moment and try to extend community sport and participation? How much, if there's only 47% that are attending as well and they're looking at 3 or more times a week, how much are we impacting them in the time that we have within contact? So there's a lot to consider within this CLP, and there's a lot for us to take away. And for me, there's a lot that I've thought about and how this could interlink with coaching. Initially, I just wanted to highlight a quick CLP around boys underachieving and how this could interlink with a football pitch. However, for me, this is extended for a huge range of CLP, which is going to further support us and support the players. And there's so many elements that I'd like to cover. Here, participation levels, 50% of boys participated in community sport 3 or more times a week from the 48% recording. 50% of boys. So where is the other 50%? So if we're losing boys, they're sitting in the other 50% not participating. So we have to ask ourselves a question, which of these player profiles do they sit in, and how are we impacting them. If they're there just for fun, we don't want to give them too much information. We don't want to overload them. We want to really impact them with short spurts of information of when they're coming to have fun, that they have the opportunity to learn, and that they can remain within the sport at their own choice, because we provided them with every platform and foundation, allowing them to learn within the process of whether they want to continue in football or not. If we create that right balance for that player, then they're gonna the standards, the expectations, the levels that they can set within their own mind, and how they understand and play the sport, and how football looks to them is the key element. If we have players who want to achieve absolutely everything, and we're not challenging or pushing them, we're not providing them with the right context, setting or environment, we're not trying to push them, then they're going to lose interest within the sport, or further move on and leave the club. So it's how we support every player. Now, for me, there's another CLP that relates to this, and it's how we could use the assistant coach to further impact each of our players. What kind of interventions, which is another CLP. So what interventions and how the assistant coach can go and support, challenge and intervene with players who want to be challenged, or how they can further support the lower achievers of the group to push on their technical. So whether we indicate that the lead coach looks at the higher performing players who want to be there and learn everything, and whether the assistant coach is then looking after a core group within the holistic team, within the holistic group that's training at that time, of highlighted 3 or 4 that are there just for fun, then it's how we utilise those roles, which I really want to cover in a CLP, and I'd like to do this with an on-pitch contact as we continue to develop. 48% of pupils said that they enjoyed extracurricular sports a lot. For me, if we're looking at the fundamentals, which is what we highlight within our Wolfpack mentality and philosophy here at the club, the emphasis is on fundamentals. So we must ensure players are having fun all the time, even if they want to learn the most and absolutely have everything. The core to it is that they're having fun. And one thing that's been hampered into me is we must remember how old they are and what they must take away from it. No matter how serious we are, no matter how high the expectations are, we must try to understand the player perspective and what they want to achieve from it. If players are looking at the club, or there's feedback to be given, or we're renowned for anything, I want us to be known for a club that is having fun. Players who have taken their time away and enjoy coming to training. So that a lot for me must be higher within the club, within my expectations of what's expected from the coaches and how we support each of our players. It's about getting that balance right, which I want to keep highlighting. But back to the low attainment in boys. These are more facts and figures which I've lifted from the Sports Wales participation report of 17-18. As you can see here, if we look at a breakdown between all pupils, primary and secondary, how many enjoy PE, how many enjoy extracurricular, and how many enjoy community sports. If we look here in a contrast of male, for primary, which is what we're looking at because these are our core years at the moment, and as we transition from primary to secondary within the next year or so, then how these stats are going to alter for us, and how we look at this within another perspective. But if we look at it here, 67% of boys said that they enjoyed community sport. So if they're enjoying community sport, and 67% of those, and we're having a high proportion of those who attend the club and are taking part, we must maximise every opportunity for those boys attending our football club and within our session. As you can see, female lift up here within their community sport to 66% themselves, which creates a 66-67% between boys and girls, where there is only a 1% difference. So when we do have girls attending, it's the same perspective, the same approach of how we impact them and their learning, and that we're maximising. But right now, it's about the context of boys underachieving, how we understand this, and how we can support them. Some further stats here. Figure 5 shows participation at least once a week in extracurricular and community sport by gender and school age. So if we look at primary here once again, and we look at male and female, if we look at community sport, boys are on 67%, girls are on 67%. So it's joint once again. So it quite clearly sees that and demonstrates that boys love extracurricular and they love community sport. So if there is low attainment within school and education, then they're attending community sport, then one, it must be fun for them to continue in that community sport and they enjoy it over education. But two, how can we build the educational elements and create players for life, ensuring that they are participants for life as highlighted by the FAW? And a key theme that has stuck with me and that message, that if 67% of those boys are enjoying sport, how can we allow them to learn? How can we impact them so they've got every opportunity possible to them, whether they want to progress through the academy, whether they want to be a professional player, semi-pro, continue to play for fun, whether they want to go into coaching, that everything is stimulated from here in the grassroots sport and club. I've coached at grassroots clubs for 6 years now. I've been in a professional academy for the last 4 odd years. I've seen two different contrasts between grassroots and academy. I've seen a holistic approach, and I've seen so many players wasted who could have achieved opportunity and talent, who could have been pushed because of the lack of coaching standards, the lack of support for these coaches, and the lack of understanding at time to further push these players. In addition to this, coaches have had this outdated mindset, outlook, or maybe haven't been aware to push these players and understand. And if we're understanding that there is low attainment in boys, how can we impact their learning? What approach are we taking? How do we communicate with them? What interventions do we provide? So there's so many elements and segments I want us to take away from this, certainly as coaches, for us to further grow and develop and to push for that talent, to give these players every opportunity possible so they can make their own informed life choices and whether they want to stay within the sport and how it benefits us as a club. A quick look at the continued community sports and most likely be participated in. Boys here said 37% football. Still, that is quite low in contrast to the amount of boys asked, that there was only 37 for football, but football was the highest. And if the highest choice of community sports available to boys is football and 37% are choosing it, and they're coming to our club, then we must really impact every player and make it as fun as possible. It quite clearly shows boys love community sports, their chosen sport is football, and if they're coming to us through our club, we must really support them as best as possible. And if they're underachievers within education, how can we make them the highest possible achievers within sport, within football? So there's a good narrative here for us to change perspective of underachievers in education to creating the highest achieving those who want to prosper within football. There's a lot to consider within this CLP, a lot of questions to be asked, and a lot of key themes for us to consider in terms of how we impact each and every player, especially the boys as we focus on this. So there's a few strategies. Here I want to highlight, boys appear to miss out on the reflective stage in contrast to girls. So it's quite clearly that boys struggle to reflect. They struggle to stop, listen, to take things on board within a narrative, to go away and think of how they can improve. So we say, oh, how can we improve? Ask the question in training. Ask it at the end. Have an intervention. How can we improve there? What do you think we should do? Next time, do you think you can do this? Give a demonstration. Repeat the action. Recreate the scenario. Allow them to understand. Support them within that reflective sequence. If they're going away and they're not thinking about how they can improve or how they can reflect, can we write some things down? Can we have a Teams meeting with them? But certainly, as part of our player characteristics that I'm going to continue on in a further CLP and part of the coaching curriculum here at the club, is creating reflective, mindful learners. Players who are mindful in what they say and how they say it. Mindful of how they're seen within the club or outside the club, whether they're role models. Are they mindful and resilient enough to reflect on their performance? How can they take information and communication on board to further learn and push in those areas? Even if they're there for fun and we've given them some feedback on the basis alone of it being feedback, how have they reflected on it and how have they taken it away? Another key segment for me of which I've taken into my coaching over the last few months is perspective. How much perspective do we understand from all of our stakeholders, especially the players? Hannan of 1997 proposed a sequence of language development from descriptive to reflective to speculative. And for me, the key element here is reflective. We want it to be core. We want it to give objectives. We want to give it the right context. We want to support players within their learning. And it must be reflective and impactful enough for them to go away and think about it, for them to learn. Even if they're showing negative behaviours, we don't want to hamper them with continued discipline. We want to set the high expectations of it's respectable. They're there to have fun. They're there to learn. That they're there to participate. And of course, if they lack the discipline, then we must take the appropriate measures. But if we're constantly hammering a player through our communication, and we're creating a context where they're not going to enjoy coming, then they're not going to go away and be mindful. They're not going to be resilient. They're not going to be reflective. Whereas if we can question and get to a player in their core of why they're underperforming or why they're showing negative behaviours, can they be reflective on it through the communication and the supporting tools that we've given them and the questions that we've asked of them to further go away and improve on their behaviour through the normal expectations and high expectations that we've set for our coaching environment and within our own coaching standards. Helping boys to make an accurate assessment of current ability. So boys who can understand what they're really good at technically. So the assessment matrix that we've created right across the board, if we support players in allowing them to identify that they're really good at running with the ball, they're really good at their first touch, they're really good at taking on players in a 1v1. So then their technical ability is quite clearly running with the ball, and how can we utilise that? What position are they playing in? Are they good on the wing? Can they understand that they are? And if they understand their current ability and what they're good at, then this can support a reflective process, understanding what they're not good at and how we can further push them. So we need to create steps to raise their attainment, which is important. And this was taken from a case study at George Abbott School in Guildford. There's a clear context here that if we highlight their current ability and we support the boys, then they're going to take a lot away from that, and they're going to want to go away and reflect on where they can improve, knowing that they're good in an area. And if they're lacking, so for me right now, if we look at the under-11s team that I coach, their first touch could be developed, and if I'm looking at a skill or control of the ball, then I want to challenge them. So they're not just coming into training launching shots. They're coming into training as soon as they have an arrival activity with purpose that they're doing kick-ups. So can this improve first touch? Can they know when and where, how and why within a game they can do a kick-up turn and build it into a sequence when they've got possession of the ball? But for me, developing kick-ups is something that I never did as a player, and I wish I could do a lot better. So for me, absolutely getting that as an arrival activity on a 3G, and then on a Saturday when they arrive on the grass, so the two different contexts of when they arrive on the grass in those environments, that it is 1-2 passing, 2-touch only. So they're improving their 2-touch, they're improving their passing as an arrival activity on the grass, but then they're doing kick-ups on the 3G. So we're trying to push those players to get as much out of them. And even if they don't want to push themselves as much as possible, by doing kick-ups, it creates that core sense of competition that they want to keep pushing themselves. If they reflect on their technique, can they improve? So everything relates to reflection. Whilst I was sitting through a similar PowerPoint myself within work in the education of underachievement in boys, one of the feedback strategies that was given from a senior member was don't create competition for boys. It hampers their learning style. For me, that's wrong. I disagree with that myself. But if we're talking about sport itself, competition is everything. Football is there to win. We want to win. We want to create natural born winners. We want to capture their hunger. We want to push for their determination levels. Maybe in education, we don't want to push on competition too much of, i.e. one boy completes work quicker than the other, or one boy is faster completing tasks over extended periods of time compared to the other, or one boy can answer more questions than the other. Then that could create a negative environment that we don't want to, that hampers learning. So I can understand it, but it's about getting that balance right, and for me, competition is key in teaching as well. But it's how we do it and when we do it. So could we have a kick-up challenge? Is that the key? Yeah. Can we get them on one-to-ones? Can we do it as a small group? Can we reflect and do it together? Can we develop technique? Now, is a goal-scoring challenge over a season beneficial to all our players? No. Could it be between the attacking players? Yes and no. It could be questioned that we're putting too much pressure on them. They go seeking goals. They become less team players, and we take away that team philosophy. And if we do it throughout the entire team, then the defenders and goalkeepers get left behind because they're not playing in those attacking positions. So then they're going to become less competitive. They're going to lose interest. So it's about how and what challenges we can do. If I was setting a goal scoring challenge, for a player, would it be how many they could score with their left feet, their head, their right foot? How many could be with a one touch? For me, that's the right development phase that we need for that player, those right challenges. It wouldn't be, can you score 30 goals compared to player A, player B, who scored 20 last year? For me, that creates an environment of negative uh, player impact, of where we're utilising one player's success to try and push for another. A player could be reflective of their own mindset of the success of another, which would allow them to push themselves. Whenever I hear of a highly successful player or performer, it's all about how they compared their standards to another, how they set the standard, how they were always looking at others and trying to push themselves. And a really good learner will look at that themselves and be like, right, I need to achieve that. But that needs to come naturally, and we need to support them within the reflective process of setting those challenges and how we support them. So, boys knew that we were making progress and they stayed involved. If they know they're making progress, they'll stay involved within the sport. They'll stay involved in learning. Can we reinforce a sense of responsibility? Can they lead on warm up? Who's our captain? Who's our vice captain? Do we change it weekly? Do we have a squad captain? So it's those roles and responsibilities that are really important, especially at a young age. Now, here are a few strategies. Creating an individual strategy and process of ownership for their own learning process. If a player is taking ownership of their own learning, they'll want to reflect, they'll want to develop. They'll go away and set themselves challenges. They'll come back to training and say, look, I can do this, I practice this. Or can I have some homework to take away? So whether that be, coach, what do you think I need to work on in terms of my shooting so I can do it in the garden with my brother, for example? If children understand and manage improvements within their own area, involving players within learning and understanding how they can learn through challenges and those take-home messages is really important. So what have they taken away from the session? So even if they forgot everything at the introduction, what are their take-home messages? What can they go away with and reflect upon? Or what are their challenges for next week? 2, as I said, chunk information and do it within training delivery. If players can understand small chunks of information, they can feel secure about it. They can feel secure about what they've captured and fully understand what is required of them. It's how we as coaches layer this information, layer the feedback, and layer the instruction within our exercises. Chunking the information is essential. If we're reflecting on a game from last week, which we lost 3-2, then we need to chunk the information of how, where, when, why, and who was involved and how we can do it collectively. But if we're hampering on for 15 minutes at a reflection, at primary school age, essentially, they're not going to take it on board. We need to chunk it up in segments throughout the session and the exercises so they can fully understand and have that holistic vision of what they could have improved collectively from the week before. But it's about chunking information. 62% of students stated they would not persevere if they did not feel they were making progress. So if we find that players aren't making progress and they're feeling this way within training, they're not going to want to push themselves within training. They're not going to want to develop. They're not going to take part in challenges. They're not going to turn up the training. Their attendance is going to drop. For me, I spend a lot of time monitoring attendance, looking at the statistics, and looking and maybe questioning if and when, how and why these players aren't at training. But at the moment, across the board, there is a great consistency of attendance. And if there's been a lack of attendance, it's been through isolation at this moment of time in 2022, illness, or they're away on holiday. For me, I set a really good standard over years of expectation building and support where players have got really good attendance naturally. So the third strategy, set attainable goals. Set goals in order to provide positive feedback. This relates to communication, feedback, and psychological. Those when, where, how, and why questions again. What language do we use? What type of feedback and intervention? Can we ask them questions within the feedback, or are we just giving them feedback? Or are we giving them instruction? Is instruction the right type of feedback? What intervention is taking place? There's a lot to consider here. Feedback is crucial within children's sports. How we communicate with these children and praise them through their continued development, through their commitments, is key to ensuring their set attainable goals, as well as understanding how they can take ownership. If players are given really good attendance, they're giving up their nights, especially at a young age, to attend and wanting to take part in football, as we saw from the stats earlier on, then this is essential. 4. The involvement in learning and their relationship with coaches. So if they have a really good relationship with their coach, they're going to want to learn. They're going to be reflective. They're going to try and take feedback on board. They're going to ask those questions. They're going to be respectful of the feedback given to them. They want to be involved in learning. So ask them, what kind of warm-up do they want to do next week? What kind of SSG do they want to do? Can they organise their own teams? But we must be mindful that one doesn't pick all the best players or the best technical players, and then the weaker players are left out. So there's that balance, and who we pick as captains, knowing that they're going to pick fair and balanced teams. Or can they pick teams based on the strategy that we give them, or whether, for example, we've given a load of numbers, but they've got to pick the numbers, because we know that creates that fair environment. But if they're involved in learning, they're going to be eager to learn, and we can implement their feedback, and we can allow player-led sessions. So, for example, we have players who take warm-ups, and they're involved in the session because they got those leadership roles. They're communicating, they're being seen to be role models, and these strategies all interlink with each other. 5th one-to-one discussions. For me, this is key. So if my assistant coach is supporting me, can he have one-to-one feedback if I'm delivering to a whole group? Or how can I have a one-to-one during my exercise that can give key feedback? Or whether I can have that little bit of time at any point within the session itself that I can have one-to-one feedback with my player, that can give them feedback, give them reflection, to ask about any previous reflections of how we support them. The strategies continued. Number 6, by understanding every player and their need. Each player is different. It's that perspective again. We need to review their player profiles, as I've highlighted, which is going to be a further CLP. The go-getter guys, as I like to call them. And I use the guys because for me it's a generic term of boys and girls, those who are involved within training. Guys can be seen as masculine, but for me it's a collective group of male and female. But even if we're looking at boys itself within this context now, the go-getter guys, the ones who want to achieve absolutely everything and want to be there. They want to be the best, they want to ask the questions, they want to learn, they want to reflect, they want to come back better next week. Everything that I've said so far, the I want to have fun guys. The ones who turn up, football's fun for me, I want to play a game. And one really good tweet that I read the other day was, and I saw a picture that accompanied it, and it was like, imagine turning up to this training session as a 9-year-old, and on this picture was a load of cones, there were hurdles, and there was a full fitness exercise. Now, I did argue the fact that if you were implementing this within an assault course, or you could use some elements of this within ball work as natural fitness, and natural fitness is key for me, especially at a young age, within a warm-up, then as a 9-year-old you're going to enjoy a little bit of hurdles and ball work and having fun with it. Whereas if there's no ball and it's full on hurdles, full on running, which I've seen some teams at 9, 10, 11 do, then thinking from the perspective of a 9-year-old, that's not turning up and going, oh, I want to have fun. And sometimes the go-getters can be demotivated by it, because they can come in and they can set their standards so high recently that they want to turn up and have a fun session, or in any sense that they may struggle with the fitness elements of it. And by having natural ball work and fitness and fun, then they can become a go-getter because they set themselves those challenges. And the I don't mind guys. Yeah, if football's on Saturday, great, I'll be forward to it. Or if football's not on, cool, I'm still happy. Whereas the go-getters, we like, what do you mean football's off Saturday? I want to be there. So for the I don't mind guys, and these three elements of players, we need to understand each and every player. And we need to understand how far we can push players. So for me at training last night, I was looking at players and how can we push them? So if there's a player who's coming in and he's just kicking a ball around, why is he kicking the ball? Is he being challenged? Is he not doing one of the coaching scenarios that we've given him because he doesn't have the technical ability? So how can we support him in his shooting and turn what we want? How can we turn what we want and expect into an expectation from the way he's turned up to a session? So if he's kicking that ball around and he finds it fun, then we want to set a challenge. So he's a go-getter and he's taking part in our expectations. But we must adapt and understand the difference between the players. So if that player's just wanting to kick a ball, he doesn't want to be challenged, then we don't just exclude him from a group. We make him inclusive. And we look at his shooting exercise and how he can be involved in learning and practice design to capture what he wants to get out of it, making it inclusive. But we must understand how we push players and expectations. 7. Reinforce our expectations. For me, I've been evaluating or reflecting on sessions recently, and I've been looking at whether players have underperformed or not achieved my standards and the expectations that I've set. Sometimes I've let this slip because I've adapted to the player and I want the player to enjoy it. However, recently I've wanted to push the expectations higher and I want the players to achieve it. Sometimes we can have these non-negotiables, and I've let the non-negotiables slip because I've tried to make adaptations in other areas. But these non-negotiables are core to me, such as turning up early, turning up with full training kit. They're the club non-negotiables, but if they're turning up early, our non-negotiable of the arrival activity is that you do the arrival activity. The non-negotiable is that you take part in the SSG. The non-negotiable is that we perform in the exercise and we execute it, achieving the set objectives. Even if we've struggled with it technically and psychologically, we've executed the exercise really well. That allows us to progress into an SSG and we can reflect on it. So it's those expectations for me that I want to reinforce and certainly use with these players. And there's going to be use of questioning techniques to generate understanding. And there's going to be a further CLP on this, because if we ask a player a question and they've given a basic answer, how can we ask them a question to draw more information, to draw more feedback and understanding out of them? And how can we create that questioning environment of questions from them when they want to learn? Because as we found within boys, they can just stand there, not ask questions because they're afraid to learn. They're afraid to get things wrong in front of a group. They're afraid to show that they don't understand. So we want to create that environment where if they don't understand, they're asking because they feel within an environment that they can ask that. We also want to ask lots of questions of everyone within the group. That generates a learning for every member. So as we continue to push forward, we want to ensure challenges for all players to continue their development, creating an eagerness to learn. We want to ensure fun sessions covering topics within the coaching curriculum to increase knowledge of players. So fun sessions, 1v1s, 2v2s, World Cups, whether it's a warm-up, whether we're using them as SSGs, whether it's part of the overall session, make it fun. Get it incorporated. And we must be aware of our own language and making sure it's age appropriate. Appropriate in terms of the context and specific terms, as mentioned, that are used, whether the players understand, whether it's too technical for their age, and to try and make sure that they understand specific terms from a young age so that they're aware. Because if we're talking about breaking lines with under 10s, which they should know in a coaching practice, for me, we've set the standards really well. Breaking lines, if we're playing it, then I expect the players to be aware of it. Whereas we could go to an environment against an academy, for example, in a friendly, and they could be shouting switch play. Now, does every player know what switch play means? Then if they don't know, then we need to certainly support their learning and know specific terms. If it's switch play, it's this, and they fully understand. And if they don't, then they ask those questions. So it all interlinks. Now, framing is a really important technical ability in terms of coaching and what's in the coaching locker. How we frame our sessions, our expectations. Is this what football looks like to a child? We must emphasise with a young child and try to understand their outlook and perspective of what football looks like, means, and what they want to achieve, which interlinks with their player profiles. So does this look like football to a 9-year-old? And if we've got a big exercise with a load of slalom poles out, we've got loads of cones, we've got lots of other little markers, are they going to come in and think, oh, this is not football? Because sometimes I'll play an SSG, and I'll take out the goals and I'll use gates, and then we'll finish that bit of the SSG, and then they'll think, and then I'll get asked the question, sorry, when are we playing a game? But that was a game because it was disguised learning. Just because we took the goals out and the goalkeepers, we set gates for you to, as a challenge, and for you to be aware of where you need to drill through or shoot the ball. Whether you can switch play naturally, which would then transition into an SSG with a goal and a goalkeeper. And then how can we build in to beat the goalkeeper? Or when we switch play in an opposed position within the final third, considering what area of the pitch we were in, where the gates were, and where the goal is, and where the players are out of possession, and how we can build it up from, say, an under 9s into an under 13 session. So it's about how we frame those sessions. But we must create aspirations for players from a young age. But the key emphasis is: does this look like football to a 9-year-old? Does this look like football to a 10-year-old? And if it doesn't, then we need to reframe our sessions and make sure that it's age appropriate. And certainly communication as part of the coaching curriculum, which I'm developing at the moment, I'm creating a list of appropriate key terminology that I'd like them to be supported with. So one of the reflections that I was looking at recently as a coach was drills. Drills are regimented, they're military, they're a bit old-fashioned. So how do we oppose this? How do we move forward? Exercise. I almost said drill earlier on, and you might have heard me. Exercises. We're going into an exercise. It sounds more familiar. It sounds more fun. It sounds like they're going to come in and have this bit of exercise naturally through the word and the context of it that's created within the language. Whereas if we say drill, they're going to go in, right, this is going to be hard work. We're going to be told to do this. It's instructions. Now, I don't disagree when and where drill should be used because you can naturally drill the players through your exercises. And if we refer to players as drilled, it means that they're confined to playing one way. And when we think of drilled, we think of Jose Mourinho teams, Diego Simeone's. They're drilled to be defensive. I was given that feedback once from a coach because he was praising the way my team played, that they were drilled and they were organised compared to his team, and my younger team beat his older age group. There is nothing wrong with being drilled, but we must understand that balance with the age that we don't want to drill players, because if we're drilling them too often and too much, then we're not exposing their learning or their minds, and they become only aware of the way we expect them to play. They then become limited as players, and they only play in one way. We want to drill them in some ways, such as getting their skills, getting the non-negotiables in, and setting those expectations. But we want to open up their learning so they know where they can play 4 or 5 positions, and they're not drilled to play one. For example, we play our goalkeepers out and make sure they're outfield players as well, and they have that time because then they're not just limited as goalkeepers. And especially if we need them to play outfield at any time. And then they've got the option. If goalkeeping is not for them at the age of 14 and they want to go and be a striker, then they can go and be a striker. If our striker wants to convert from a striker to a goalkeeper, then they've got some level of technical ability. We need to create the foundations across every technical area between outfield and a goalkeeper, as well as across the board in all the technical ability areas and the 4 pillars that allows players to have those aspirations as well as be adaptable and open-minded to all the learning. If they're drilled too much, then they won't have that open learning exercise, they won't have the open learning platform, and they won't continue to develop as a player. Now, when I was doing some research and I was looking at the lack of achievement within boys, I could have gone a lot more down the educational route and taken it in the way that I've had it delivered to me recently. But I've wanted to try and relate this to coaching as much as possible, and I've done a lot of coaching reflection. But we must remember there is an underachievement in boys, and there's a lot more background research that supports it that I could have put in. But if you want to do this on your own terms, then there is a world of information out there, and it stems from the 1990s. The underachievement of boys is huge, and for us to be as aware, especially as volunteer parents and volunteers involved in supporting running the group, I just want to bridge the gap, bridge the knowledge, support everyone as much as possible, to give learning outlooks. And if there's other coaches who want to deliver CLPs on areas that they want to deliver on, or their strengths, then that's what I want to create. I want to create an environment of learning and creating contemporary issues that we're all aware of, and question and question our learning, question our understanding, question how we support our players, question practice, question delivery. But the Pygmalion effect. The Pygmalion effect shows that teachers' expectations of their students have a strong effect on student performance. If a teacher increases their expectations of student performance, this will result in better student performance. As much as I say student and teacher, and we must remember that we are football coaches. Again, another reflection that was said to me in a conversation, that we are football coaches. We're there to educate, we're there to nurture, we're there to coach, we're there to be a role model, we're there to be a supporting mechanism. We're much more than a coach. We combine 4 or 5 roles into one as a coach. And for me, this is key, and one thing we must never forget. As much as it is coaching, we must remember the first key element, that we are coaches. We mustn't forget that we're there to educate them and set them. But I wanted to take this terminology, this statement here of teachers and students, because it relates to education. But if we're looking at it as coaches, then the coaches' expectations. And that's everything that I said earlier on. Setting high expectations, create aspirations. Set those expectations the further on. When developing assessment tools, so individual coaches and league coaches at age groups may have appropriate assessment tools. When developing these assessment tools as part of our coaching practice, we need to ensure we set high expectations. Setting high expectations and how we expect the session to perform will allow us to set rewards. For example, achieving an SSG if performing the exercise well as challenging players, can become a reward, and it becomes more of a challenge and stimulation in the session, because we don't want sessions to become too familiar to the players, where it's like, right, warm up, into exercise, into SSG, we're done. So whether we have a carousel session, whether we have whole part whole sessions, whether we have sessions where we don't have an SSG embedded, whether the SSG is at the start rather than the end, or whether it is SSG, which is whole part whole, SSG at the start, we go into an exercise, back to an SSG, that is whole part whole. So an SSG can sometimes become an expectation of a player and become too familiar, or it can be used as a reward. We can also intervene with sessions to support earning these rewards and to push for high standards. We can understand through interventions when a player is underachieving through how, what, where, when, why techniques. We know who, because we've identified the player already. But if a player is underachieving, then they're underachieving the expectation for a reason, and we must understand why. We must set the expectations, but don't set them too high. We must remember SMART objectives. Being a good coach and supporting our players, we must continue to reevaluate the purpose of sessions, their impact, and as to whether we can set higher expectations over a period of time. This relates to the player profiles. If a player is there just for fun, setting too many expectations too soon and too early and too high, they'll lose interest and they won't come back. Whereas if they are there for fun and we can see areas that we can push them, how we can challenge them and support their learning, we can set expectations over a period of time. Not every player who's going to come to us and come through our doors is going to be the next Ronaldo, or the player of a Roy Keane mentality where it is football, 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 football. Some players will come in just for fun. And if we can develop their mindset and help them to understand that they're having fun and to make sure they're having fun, we can set the higher expectations over a period of time to support their learning. If you want to research the Pygmalion effect even more, it is a whole host of information in a world, again, which originally I hadn't included in the CLP, but as I thought more on this, I had to involve it because it creates more purpose of how boys are underachieving and how we can support them. What our beliefs are, what our actions are, what the beliefs of others are, and the actions of others. What the causes, the impacts, how we reinforce, how we influence. And again, looking at that perspective. So if we have a belief as a coach of our expectations, how can we influence our players through our actions? What communication tools are we using to ensure our beliefs are communicated across? How can we influence players to play for us? How can we influence players to learn? And that is all done through our actions. So whether it's like, right, come on, we're going to do this, and we're setting up a fun session today, and our actions to support this player, and we're ensuring he's inclusive, will impact their beliefs. They'll go, do you know what? I like this coach. I want to learn. I want to do it for him. I want to give feedback. I want to be involved in a session. I want to have leadership. Then it causes them to improve their actions. So this is a really key tool for me that I want to inherit as part of our coaching curriculum and purpose here at the club. Remember, fundamentals. We really want to impact each and every player here at the club, and we want to impact every player who has time with us. Fundamentals. Fun. But the context of this, and quick recap, was underachievement in boys. And we must remember, if boys are underachieving, then what strategies can we use so they become achievers? Can we chunk information? Can we give them leadership roles? How are they involved in learning? And all the other strategies we've identified and looked at. Remember, it's been identified and stats prove that boys are underachievers, but they love to play community sport and they love to play football, especially at primary school age. And we want to capture them as young children to become lifelong participants. If they're underachieving, then there's a question why. And if they're coming on that pitch with all their needs and areas where they're being influenced outside of football and they're being impacted, which can affect their mindset, then could they end up underachieving? And we want to know why. And if they're underachieving on the football pitch, how can we support them? So even though underachievement in education is key right now in research and topics going forward, especially as it breaks down into FSM, BME and so on, and they're looking at it into so much more detail, we have underachievers in football. And how do these two narratives connect within one world? So we must remember the achievement of boys is essential, and using the right strategies, we can create those who want to prosper and become high achievers through sport, especially in boys. But underachievement within education and underachievement on the pitch, we must remember of the right strategies. This is the longest CLP, and I only expected it to be 20 minutes, but there is so much I wanted to cover in there, and there is so much more CLP to cover. I look forward to us growing as a club, and there is so much more for you to research if you want to delve into that world. But I'd like to thank everyone for their time as usual, and I look forward to delivering more CLP over time. Thank you, Coach Luca, the Reflective Coach.